Hi, I'm Ann Ray. I'm with the Safe and Sustainable Water Resources research team, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. First, we wanted to mention that there are 3 upcoming EPA webinars in July. One on July 11th, available tools to advance our understanding of cumulative impacts. July 12th, there's a stormwater modeling response to a wide area radiological dispersal device incident webinar. And on July 25th, there's wildfire impacts on drinking water, and there are links in the slides that you can register for those events. Next slide. Today, we're going to hear from Dr. Laura Urban on reducing nitrogen in groundwater through enhanced on-site wastewater treatment and wetland restoration. And her presentation will discuss work that's going on between EPA and several partners and stakeholders to make advancements in denitrifying septic system technologies and wetland restoration of cranberry bogs to help stem groundwater pollution. Dr. Urban is a hydrologist with EPA ORD's Center for Environmental Measurement and Modeling. She's in Narragansett, Rhode Island, and earned her graduate degrees from Stanford University and her bachelor's from the University of Virginia. Her research has focused on sustainable use of water resources, given challenges like geogenic arsenic in aquifers, pumping-induced land subsidence, and excess nutrients from a range of human activities. She works collaboratively with a range of local, state, federal, tribal, and non-governmental partners to reduce legacy and recurring groundwater pollution. And with that, I will hand it over to Laura.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, everyone, for joining me this afternoon. We have a great turnout and a large audience from all around, so I will do my best to set a stage that brings us to the same page with some of the background on these issues, so we can spend the hour together, and then also dig into some of the projects that we're currently working on with a wide range of partners in a particular context. So hoping to strike that balance, welcome any feedback afterwards. As Anne mentioned, I'm working on these projects with a wide range of partners who all bring complementary perspectives and capabilities to this work. They're all critical. We are working very much on a wicked problem, and it requires collective action and coordinated action, learning, engagement to make a dent in it. So all of these partners are crucial, and I'll call them out by name at the end, but it's even hard to put boundaries on who's in and who's not, because there's so much work to be done. I should acknowledge my role in this work. And so I come as an earth system scientist and groundwater hydrologist specifically. And so my role is to translate existing research information and site-specific data through the lens of groundwater hydrology and contaminant remediation. So you can, filter this work through that lens, and you can direct any critique of this presentation to my bias and as the one that created these slides on behalf of all of these folks involved. And I appreciate more and more each day what the UN stated and visually presented nicely in this brief, that once groundwater becomes contaminated, it can be extremely difficult and costly to remedy, right? And this visual shows how there are just many different sources at the surface. In clean water language, point sources that we can attribute to a specific pipe, or non-point sources that are dispersed, and they seep into the ground and they get into all these nooks and crannies. They stick and unstick to the rocks. They flow through complicated pathways. It takes a long time to both contaminate and to flush out or to restore these groundwater systems that we're so reliant on for drinking water and for the water that's in our rivers and ponds and estuaries and other recreational and cultural and economically important amenities that we enjoy. And the problem of excess nutrient loading that I'll be speaking to today is particularly widespread. And so colleagues within EPA ORD have done some nice work on nitrogen inventories specifically across US watersheds. That's shown here on the right. And so we have maps of things like total inputs to watersheds, outputs, so things like crop harvest and other outputs, and surpluses. And what you see at a national scale is that we have really the greatest surplus is in our agricultural and population centers, right? And that's because we're taking nitrogen from the atmosphere where it's pretty stable, and we fix it to make fertilizers, apply those to crops. There's excess there. There's losses to groundwater and surface waters. We grow crops and animals, we eat them, and then we excrete excess nitrogen, other nutrients and contaminants. And that becomes an overload to the environment beyond what it can assimilate and process. And so while these inventories are for nitrogen, we should recognize that nitrogen comes with lots of co-pollutants, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, pharmaceuticals, personal care products that we're excreting as well, among other emerging contaminants that as a class. And that nitrogen alone, to say nothing of these other things, is linked to a wide range of human health and ecological impacts. So we have drinking water violations, nuisance and harmful algal blooms, and habitat loss over time for economic and culturally significant species. And nitrate in particular is a form of nitrogen that moves easily in groundwater. It's a regulated drinking water contaminant. We have a maximum contaminant level of 10 milligrams per liter nitrate as nitrogen. And it has high variability when we go out to sample it. This is one particular map that thresholds at that drinking water standard for California, but there are many others like it where we would see high variability in nitrate in space, time, at any given particular location, and in the concentrations that we observe. It's reactive, it's bioavailable, and it's convertible to other forms. That's why it becomes a problem for those algal blooms. And nitrate is a form that moves easily, if slowly, in groundwater to receptors. So from any given recharge area where we're applying nitrogen at the land surface, it is going to take days to more likely decades or even longer, centuries or millennia to discharge to streams, ponds, pumping wells, and the like, places that we would interact with it. And as a result of that slow leakage and also slow discharge through groundwater and also surface water and direct discharges, receiving waters become impaired by excess nutrients, along with other stressors that are contributing as well. And so we get these blooms of algae, that fertilization of the water bodies that reduces water clarity. It starves light to bottom species, including submerged aquatic vegetation. It basically, overgrows, and it's unsightly, but in some cases also hazardous, where we have toxic algal blooms that can produce neuro and other toxins. And in general, as these algal blooms die off, they also cause low dissolved oxygen events, fish kills, basically a wide range of impairments to water bodies that we want to use for a variety of reasons. So on Cape Cod, where we're working, and for those that aren't familiar, Cape Cod is on the eastern side of Massachusetts. From that national map you see here, it's the arm hanging off of Massachusetts. These waters are widely impaired by excess nutrients. And in this context, the overwhelming source is on-site wastewater treatment systems. And due to development density here, and it's a very popular place both year-round and particularly for the summer tourist season, those septic systems have contributed to widespread loading of a sole source aquifer, so the only source of drinking water supply, nearly 1,000 ponds and other water resources, including estuaries, so semi-enclosed saltwater embayments that don't flush very well, that receive this loading and become impaired by that chronic source. And so on Cape Cod, there are now more than 30 estuaries with total maximum daily loads. This is a mechanism under the Clean Water Act Section 303D that allows for a determination of a pollution budget. So what is the pollutant of concern? In this case, it's nitrogen that's considered the limiting nutrient in estuaries. And what levels of loading would it take to sustain the ecosystem and the uses that we want to have for those water bodies. And so these TMDLs specify load reductions, and they're generally speaking across the Cape saying about 80% of what we can control is from on-site wastewater treatment systems, and we need to knock that loading down Cape-wide by about 50%. But in some sub-watersheds, it's up to 100%. So we really need to reduce this loading. We've been working intensively in the 3 Bays watershed. That's sort of central Cape Cod. It's hatched in green here, which towards that TMDL. And as specified under another section of Clean Water Act 208, there was area-wide water quality planning done Cape-wide to try to say, what are the ways that we can reduce this legacy and recurring nutrient loading? And so there's a lot of ways. This is showing you the tech matrix. So a range of things that we can do at different scales, things like extend sewers and provide some more centralized water treatment, centralized wastewater treatment, better septic systems, fertilizer management, land use planning and regulations. We can do things in water bodies through constructed wetlands or shellfish aquaculture or dredging and inlet widening. There's the whole gamut of things that we can do to work on this from different angles, because that's what it's going to take at this point. And we determined that there were 2 particular areas that we could help move forward with that I'll be talking about today. So where did that come from? We didn't come up with this research in the office, but went out to stakeholders and held a problem formulation workshop early on to say, what are the current needs and who can help us specify what the directions are to take at this time in terms of research and activities that we can work on in partnership. So through that stakeholder engagement process, we developed partnerships and projects. And the 2 that I'll speak, there are several threads to this work, but 2 that I'll speak about today are in the vein of enhancing on-site wastewater treatment and restoring cranberry farms to wetlands. So zooming out for a moment to zoom back in, I want to paint a national portrait of on-site wastewater treatment, because it is much bigger than, the needs are much bigger than nitrogen removal. There's more than 1 in 5 US households using some form of on-site treatment and disposal. We last surveyed this nationally in 1990. There's greater use in reliance in the Northwest, Northeast, and Southeast. And as I said, it's a source of many different kinds of pollutants to groundwater. There's a wide range of impacts for human environmental health because of the variability in treatment technologies. We have in some areas, just straight pipes running out to the backyard or a local creek. We have cesspools and cesspits that are more rudimentary, and then septic systems are an advancement, and beyond that, advanced or enhanced septic systems that can perform a higher level of treatment for nitrogen and potentially other things. But I just want to frame this as saying there's a wide range of things ranging from acute gastrointestinal concerns all the way to more chronic impairments that we see with nutrients. So a conventional septic system, which is one of the more advanced in that spectrum I described, does a good job at settling solid and separating them in a septic tank, also fats, oils, and grease, but discharges liquid effluent to a soil treatment area or a leach field continuously. So there's a continuous wastewater flow path that's making its way to groundwater. And that flow path tends to be enriched in nitrate in that form that I mentioned before. And so the alternatives to discharging that nitrate to groundwater would be, broadly speaking, to separate waste streams. So separate in particular toilet waste is where a lot of those nutrients are coming from. So we can do things like urine diversion, composting toilets, or tight tanks, which is just a tank that's not connected to a leach field. And we do see those types of alternatives in specific settings. So our state beaches here, campgrounds, RVs, boats, seasonal homes, things of that nature. I won't be speaking more to these solutions, but I did want to highlight them. The other alternative is to add a treatment stage for mixed effluent. So if you're not going to replumb your home, then what can we do to modify the down gradient treatment system? And in this case, that's because after leaving a conventional septic system, there are limited opportunities for a process called denitrification in the subsurface. So this is the process, the final stage of a nitrogen cycle that will send nitrogen back to the atmosphere. So diverting it from that effluent stream. And it's complicated. There are multiple steps. This is a simplification of a lot of microbial processes that are happening at small scale. There's diverse communities that need specific conditions to fully complete the cycle of taking the organic waste that we produce, turning them to inorganic forms and by the process of nitrification, and then that final denitrification step. And at various stages of this, you need to have oxygen, exclude oxygen, have the appropriate supply of electron donors to accomplish this full cycle. So it's a multi-step process, and it's a little bit sensitive to, we're relying on a microbial ecosystem to do this work, and they need the right conditions. And so in general, alternative septic systems that are designed for nitrogen removal supply these conditions by doing one of two main things. Again, generally speaking, they either add a treatment unit after the septic tank and before that leach field, so that's option A, or modify that soil treatment area in various ways, option B. And there are many technologies out there that already exist to do that. And some do it quite well. There's variable performance, both in a treatment center setting, but also in the real world. When you get out there into actual homes that behave and have different user groups, there's variable performance in terms of cost and maintenance and aesthetics and things that people are willing to tolerate to use these things. Variable approval and availability by state. So can you get them? Can you get them permitted and installed where you live? And then where you live determines what the best available approach is to by your site. What's your lot layout? What's your depth to groundwater? There are many constraints. So there's a wide landscape of possibilities out here that from which I'm going to drill down into what we're working on. And the question that's motivating this part of the work is how might we improve the performance of locally available options? So how can we make better options available to users in this context? It doesn't get very context specific. And we know from prior work at, in particular at Massachusetts Alternative Septic System Test Center, which is a partner in this work, and also SUNY Stony Brook's Center for Clean Water Technology, and others, that there are, that adding a carbon source at the right stage of this treatment train, in particular a lignocellulosic carbon source, wood chips or sawdust, can really help provide a really high degree of nitrogen removal. And so we're working with, in this study, two designs. One's a proprietary, others a non-proprietary, that use wood chips in a demonstration effort on the Cape to try to move some forward for greater availability to users. So we're using a version of an option A and an option B that I described before. And we have these installed such that we're measuring influent and effluent concentrations both on a monthly basis, so we can get at that reduction as well as the flow to the system, so we can come up with total load numbers. And it's the Mass TC that is monitoring these systems on that basis. And we want to get at loads because concentrations can be tricky, right? You can have a relatively low concentration output with high volume that's really producing a lot of mass to the environment. And ultimately, it's the mass that a water body receives, that loading, that mass over time, and what it can process that will determine those outcomes we're seeking to influence. So we have now 13 enhanced septic systems installed in really close proximity. They're on about 1/4 to 1/2 acre lots, tightly clustered so that we can monitor both their individual and aggregate impact on groundwater quality. And we have a carefully designed groundwater monitoring network that we collaborated with the U.S. Geological Survey's New England Water Science Center, who are key partners in this work as well, to both set up the demonstration, know where the groundwater is going, know where we could collect samples that would be representative of the system, and monitor for change over time. So these results that I'll share from this demonstration are very much in progress, and they will change. So we're showing you, we're sort of opening revealing the current state of things, but please do recognize that this is in progress. And the data I'll show you are from through February this year, which I had ready to go by the time this went to press. So these are for the 13 systems, variable number of months depending on when they went in and started sampling. You're looking at total nitrogen on this left plot from all the influent samples we've collected to the effluent samples. And in some cases, we have lysimeters, so pans below that leach field to look at that final effluent. And we have pretty high influent concentrations relative to what you'll see from some other studies. So a median for all these systems around 87 total nitrogen, going down to about 3.2 in effluent. And really no change with the lysimeters, because by the time you reach this level of treatment, we're really not expecting much more can be accomplished further downstream. And so when we pair that total nitrogen reduction, so anytime we've taken an influent, effluent at a system, we're able to calculate a reduction number from that. So for all the sample sets, over all the time that I had available to show, that's 89 samples, a mean reduction of around 92% and median around 96. And some of them are lower. You'll see there's some spin up period with these systems. Sometimes there's some kinks to work out and some time that it can take for microbial communities to get established. But over time, we tend to see better performance as those kinks get worked out. We're also, as I mentioned, measuring the flow to these systems. So we're able to, say how this compares to other sites and other homes. All of these data, if you see from other studies, will depend on the context that you're working in. And from those combined pieces of information, we can get at the load estimates and load reductions. And so in addition to total nitrogen, we're measuring all the different nitrogen components for diagnostic information that we can use on the fly for performance. We're also measuring phosphorus, not because these systems were designed for it, but it was a recognized interest among our stakeholders. And we're measuring other parameters of wastewater indicators like BOD and TSS and alkalinity. I'm not going to get into, but so here we can come up with an estimate using those monthly influent effluent concentrations and mean daily flow. How you do these numbers, the ways that you aggregate these data will give you different numbers. I want to say that up front. But the median load reduction, if I do it this way, is total nitrogen of around 94%. So going from, for these systems, a median of 15 kilograms per year in influent to 1 in effluent, or for phosphorus, a median of 1.4 kilograms per year down to 0.7 for 47% reduction. And the phosphorus, again, not the design, but maybe settling out, precipitating, within the larger treatment system that we have with these systems. On the groundwater side, I mentioned before, there's really high variability, but we've carefully set up this monitoring network with control and impact sites and measuring it over time so that we can try to tease that out. I'll show that in a moment. But I do want to dwell for a moment on the fact for anyone thinking of doing similar work that it's not trivial to decide how to sample a groundwater system. We do have high spatial and temporal variability. When we're in a septic plume, we can get highs over, we've seen 45 mgs per liter, but in general, average across the set, more like 5 mgs per liter. So, and in any given site, we'll see variability over time. And so it's very much worth thinking about why and how to pursue this kind of monitoring. And so, as I mentioned, we've set this up so that we have control and impact sites. So impact being the area where we've intensively deployed these septics and are hoping to see an impact of enhanced treatment, as well as surrounding areas that are unsewered, that are of similar housing density and comparable to monitor. So we, as of the time that I'm showing you now, because of the transport time between the leach fields and the monitoring wells, we're not expecting to see big changes yet, but we are continuing to collect this data quarterly and hope to see that we've substantially reduced groundwater nitrate in particular, and we're monitoring other parameters as well. And so zooming out again, because to go home by home and replace every individual septic ORIX and sewers is a big lift. We also have a burden of legacy contaminants that have been loaded over decades to the groundwater system. So this map on the right is showing you just sort of the housing density in the area that we're working, and a current cranberry farm complex where we are seeking to perform wetland restoration. And the reason that is significant is that through wetland restoration, wetlands can do all those processes that I mentioned with respect to the nitrogen cycle, and wetlands serve as receptors of large volumes of groundwater discharge. So from hundreds of homes, they're receiving that. There's sort of low spots in the landscape that are that are weeping groundwater, intercepting those loads, and offer the opportunity to expose them to more favorable conditions for treatment that I mentioned. And they have the potential to operate on a much larger scale. So in this work, you're seeing the cranberry farm complex we're working on the left. As it currently is, it's highly channelized, ditched with elevated agricultural surfaces to enhance yield or output of cranberries, but used to be more of a naturalized wetland site, more similar to this area of the site in the lower right, which if we can perform an ecological restoration here, may also serve to help reduce really large volumes of that nitrogen from flowing offsite to a river that gets to the estuary with the TMDL in much shorter order. So we could really knock a lot of that loading down, perhaps more quickly. And so the restoration objectives and working with an even larger group of partners, as you can imagine, as you scale these things, have even more folks involved in critical ways. So we're seeking to reduce downstream nitrogen loads through creating self-sustaining wetlands. So low maintenance wetland features that can also renew ecosystems that are of cultural significance. And we work with the members of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe to bring in species and assemblages of species that are significant to them. There's also an opportunity for enhanced fish passage, so a rerouted herring run that will go through this restoration, opportunities for passive recreation, walking, wildlife observation, and really learning among project partners about how we do this work even better. So, and to get a little bit into the weeds of what we have here, we have a complex system. It's a natural and highly modified agriculturally operating system. We have lots of baseline data and a large body of research on treatment wetlands in general that have been built in many contexts for exactly this purpose. And we have a lot of uncertainty, right? So the question animating this work is how might we design, anticipate, and monitor for pollutant load reduction so that, because all of those features are really important to getting this work done and knowing that we did it. So the process in terms of designing for nitrogen load reductions that we're working on is, again, to enhance that denitrification. And we're going to do that through greater contact of nitrate-enriched water with wetland soils. So I sometimes, perhaps too cavalierly, refer to the septics as wetlands in a box. They're not as charismatic as these systems, which have birds and fish and people and are very have a lot of other co-benefits, but they are receiving, as wetlands are receiving a lot of that nitrate-enriched water from those septic systems. The plots here are showing nitrate as the blue is the fraction of nitrate in the inflowing and outflowing waters, and the other colors are particulates and organics, but the predominant form is nitrate coming into the system. And if we can expose it to more surface area that's wetland, not those elevated surfaces and channels, but really let it have contact with the microbial communities that exist in the soils and have time to sit and process, then we have a greater chance of off-gassing that nitrogen at the site. And so we have nitrate coming in here at about 2 milligrams per liter as nitrogen. We have other inflows from ponds that are less enriched in nitrate. We have outflow that's kind of going out. It's 1 mg per liter because it's been diluted and attenuated to some extent, but we have an opportunity to knock that down much lower. And what we know in terms of designing, and we work very closely with these design partners. You can see them on site in the left picture here, who are working to actually do the engineering work and construction to get this done. What their design principles need to be, as I said, that enhancing denitrification through greater contact with wetland soils. And we know this from prior work to be an aerial process. We need to spread that water on as much wet area as we can. It's most dependent on nitrate concentrations, the hydraulic loading rate. So that's the flow that you're passing through a system divided by the wetted area that you can give it, and temperature. So this process is temperature dependent as well because microbes slow down like we all do in the winter. And so the key for anybody thinking about applying this in a different setting is, does your site have nitrate flowing through it? And what are your opportunities to wet up a wetland surface? The best references that I have for anticipating nitrogen load reductions in this context. So that is to say, are you designing a wetland for mitigation of non-point source nitrate pollution? I've turned to Cadleck's book on treatment wetlands. This is a great resource, over 1,000 pages, lots of consideration for the complexities across different sites and contexts. He also has paper on constructed marshes for nitrate removal. And then Crumpton and co-authors paper on water quality performance of wetlands receiving non-point source nitrogen loads. So that's for anyone who would like to do a dive into that literature. And I really, in particular, like the figures from Crumpton and co-authors where they have modeled data from a number of wetland restoration sites in Iowa to try to give you a handle on these design parameters and where we need to be in terms of our hydraulic loading rates, how quickly we're moving water through the site, what nitrogen removal efficiencies can we expect? It's highly variable, right? At any given loading rate, you can have, a factor of 2 difference in removal efficiency. And this matters to stakeholders that are considering pursuing this work. And so a key question here is, how do we translate? We have a ton of research and models and practices that are already out there. How do we bring that to a new site and all of its, special characteristics? So what we're working to do at this site for that key objective of reducing downstream nitrogen loads are, for step 1, we have determined that we are intercepting nitrate-enriched groundwater. We know that it's about 70% of the water flowing out of the site is from groundwater. So we're receiving, and we know that it's thousands of kilograms of nitrogen that are flowing off of it. What we seek to do is to slow the flow on site. So we're going to plug those ditches, narrow that main channel, increase the sinuosity and the baffles the water experience, slow the flow, and make it stay here longer in this treatment environment. Roughen the surface through pit and mounds. Really just try to reduce short circuits as much as possible in order to enhance inundation extent and residence time at this site. We're monitoring, again, with our partners at USGS, we're monitoring the outflow. We have a USGS stream gauge and a nitrate sensor there, as well as there's approximately monthly grab sampling for other parameters as well to inform what the loads are currently, and then continue this monitoring through and after restoration to say what difference was made. And so we see that we have higher loads in colder months. So that's going to be a fundamental constraint. That's tough. It would be nicer if we got all the loading in the nice warm months when the microbes are most active. We additionally have other constraints of what we can do with water levels with respect to adjacent parcels. There's going to be continued farming adjacent to this restoration and other users. So and we also have to consider other pollutants, right? When we re-wet a cranberry bog, we're particularly aware that phosphorus release can happen. There could be other, when we change the redox conditions, which is what we're seeking to do, both in the septics and here, where we have the potential to operate on other pollutants as well. And then, of course, the expense, right? It's not trivial to come in and do all this design work and to perform the restoration itself. We also have significant opportunities here. So in addition to that nitrate load reduction and the scale that a site like this can achieve, there's the potential for relatively low maintenance for this treatment operation. If we can get it up and running, it's some degree self-sufficient. And then those other co-benefits that I mentioned for recreators and for cultural significance and general enjoyment of this place and the learning that we derive from it that can be applied to other sites throughout New England and other contexts. And so a question that comes up a lot from many stakeholders is, what about other pollutants? So we have this mechanism through the TMDL process that's driving us towards nitrogen reductions, but we know there are other pollutants that we're concerned about, phosphorus among them. Stakeholders are worried about PFAS. They're worried about a wide range of other contaminants that they know or are hearing more about. We're mindful of that. My colleague Susan Glassmeyer within EPA's Office of Research and Development is, in particular, she's been sampling our wells for a wide range of emerging contaminants, over 150 compounds, includes many of the things I mentioned earlier. And she's also doing work at MassTC on the septic systems that we're working with and other forms of traditional enhanced models to look at CECs coming in and out of those as well. So I can connect you with Susan if those studies, also very much in progress, are of interest. And another question that we field a lot is, what about changes in loading, right? So as we're doing this work, I think we can't just change one thing, right? There's other conditions that are changing in the watershed. There may be new development. There may be changes in existing land use. The number of people in a house, where people are living and spending their time has changed in the pandemic. There may be other changes that are going on in the landscape, as well as more broadly climate control. So, how much, what's happening with precipitation in and around the site and changes in groundwater flow to the site that are driven by that. We can't control the changes in loading that are, that are happening externally, but we do need to be mindful of them and try to control them in our experimental and data collections. And so I'm going to move towards closing up here and say that the solutions that I'm talking about really exist in this broader context that I brought up earlier. There's definitely more than two. There's a wide range even within the two that I talked about of different variations on those two. We do need to be mindful of the total mass of pollutants, right, from all the different sources and how those are changing, and not get overly focused on concentrations or any one source when we could be overlooking other important pieces of this. And beyond just the technical and environmental dimensions of this, we really have to be mindful of perceptions and values of people, because there are no solutions that people won't use or implement. Excuse me. And I've spoke a little bit to limitations and co-benefits, but it's really key in evaluating any of these solutions to this problem that we really clearly articulate, identify, and be mindful of those throughout, because of the fact that these solutions do exist at contexts that range from site-specific to watershed scale and regional scale. I do want to point out some related references from my colleagues at EPA ORD that are current. This is so very much directly related to these studies. I haven't expanded on there's lots of other work by EPA and other agencies in these topic areas. But these are some recent publications that we've developed related to the factors that govern homeowners' willingness to adopt nitrogen reducing septic systems, other considerations for alternative technologies in general beyond cost and performance, stakeholder engagement and how we do that better at a watershed scale, thinking about the trade-offs and when, where, and how we implement different interventions. There's work on denitrification in the setting of oyster aquaculture as well that's related here. And then our problem formulation workshop report if there are key insights in there you may want to explore. So I'll close to reiterate that, of course, that once these groundwater systems become contaminated, it's really, really tricky. It's really tough, and it requires us to stay focused, engaged, and collaborative in our approaches if we seek to remedy this issue. So I really thank you for your time and attention today. Please do direct your questions and comments to me. I really welcome any feedback, and I very sincerely thank a large group of people. I think there's maybe 30 or more identified specifically here that are directly involved in the doing of this work, the organizing, the sample collections, the analysis, the perspectives, there's so many dimensions to getting these projects done. And with that, I will stop and take your questions.
Thank you, Laura. That was a very good and informative presentation. So we have a few questions that hopefully we'll be able to get to some of them. I don't know if we'll be able to get to all of them. Let's see. So I'm trying to think if I can group them together a little bit. So one question has come in. What does the maintenance look like for constructed wetlands for reducing nitrogen?
Yeah, so I haven't, to be truthful, been involved in it, so I can't so much comment on it from personal experience. Once they're up and running, you know, we do need to be mindful of where water's flowing, our places getting clogged, but in general, they're pretty self-sufficient. They're pretty low maintenance.
Thank you. And another question, and this I think is referring to the septic systems. What soil modifications can be made beneath the drain field to increase denitrification?
Yeah, thank you. I didn't elaborate on the different designs that can be used. So they range from, you know, adding an amendment of sawdust and or wood chips or sulfur, some kind of electron donor to the bottom of your leach field. So just, you know, adding that in a regular just free-flowing setup to providing containment of a leach field, of a sand leach field, and then routing that nitrified effluent to a box of wood chips or a secondary area that contains those electron donors at that appropriate stage. There's a number of different sort of ways. What you're seeking to do is allow for a trickling, well oxygenated setting, and then bring back in those carbon electron donors at a later stage, and then exclude oxygen. So it's a tricky balance of getting the saturation conditions right and the reactants in place. And there are a range of ways to do it.
Thank you. Have you looked at the effects of cluster treatment systems, larger soil absorption systems with multiple homes, or just the individual on-site?
Yeah, we're just working in this study with individuals, but our partners have explored larger installations, and that certainly clustered systems where you can put them in can make a lot of sense. And there are, you know, so those types of systems do exist and are context specific where that's going to work.
And the next question is from Scott Horsley. Since you know him, I will say who it's from. He really liked your presentation. The average nitrogen concentration in your presentation was 87 milligrams per liter. The MEP studies on the Cape assumes a 35 milligram per liter influent and 26 milligram per liter effluent concentration for standard Title V systems. How might this higher measured concentration affect things going forward?
Yeah, so it's hard to get anchored on concentrations for the reasons that, you know, I mentioned before. They do vary from house to house, from user to user, from it's hard to from demonstration study to demonstration study, right? It's really it's tricky to use those numbers. And then of course, when then you go to apply them to larger scale models, like the ones you're referring to, you know, you're adding a source term of some concentration, you're routing it through a watershed that is assumed to do certain things, and then you're calibrating what's going on in a water body and all the processes in there to attenuate it. And so there's a lot of knobs to turn and ways that you can sort of go from input to output, right? And so I am wary of getting too deep into those weeds for lots of complicated reasons. But in this study, what we are seeing is high, but not unrealistically high concentrations in influent, higher than others would see, and a very significant reduction in effluent, which is possible with other treatment technologies as well. This is not the first time anyone has shown this by any means, but offering another option for very significant reduction of nitrogen to the mix.
Thank you. What sort of 401/404 water quality and wetlands permitting is involved in the use of the naturally occurring wetlands, the cranberry bogs, in this case, for wastewater treatment?
Yeah, for permitting questions, I would have to refer you to our colleagues at Interfluve, the design engineers who are, and Horsley Witten as well, who are deep in the weeds of the permitting questions. It's really beyond my scope, but I don't underestimate the significance of those processes.
Is there a maintenance agreement that property owners must adhere to when installing post-septic tank treatment? If so, how do you ensure each property owner is properly maintaining the system components?
Yeah, so there often are maintenance agreements that come into play with taking on these enhanced technologies, and those are determined, specified by state regulatory agencies, and so there's a spread. You do have to monitor and maintain these things to ensure performance. They're mini wastewater treatment plants, and we do that monitoring and maintenance at that scale, and it also needs to be done at this scale to ensure that that things are continuing to go as expected. And so the schedule for that can vary. We're doing the monthly sampling because it gives us very high resolution data. The requirements in our context are quarterly for other performance indicators, but and sort of simultaneous to this, our partners are involved with setting up a responsible management entity at MassTC to think about ways that we can take some of the maintenance and monitoring off of individual homeowners and really treat these systems like more like the infrastructure that's serving more of a public purpose than they currently are sort of envisioned to be.
And then this is a clarifying question, I think. Are the 13 systems installed used all year round, or are some seasonal?
They're largely year round, but there is some, come and go. But the people are typically there.
Are there any direct benefits that might encourage homeowners and stakeholders to take action who might be concerned with more tangible and shorter term results?
Can you repeat the first part of that question? Are there any what?
Direct benefits?
Or maybe just repeat the whole thing.
Yeah, are there any direct benefits that might encourage homeowners or stakeholders to take action who might be concerned with more tangible and shorter term results? So maybe, are there things people can do quickly rather than, the longer term need to sewer the area?
Yeah, I'm sort of thinking along two threads. Like, so what are the incentives for individual homeowners? And there have been different mechanisms to either subsidize partially or fully replacement to get these developing technologies to a more vetted, proven state so that they can be, for example, costs can come down and they can be more widely available. There's more familiarity with them among installers and, and municipalities and all the different layers of this system. So there are some sort of site-specific incentives, and then there are, regulatory changes or requirements for nitrogen-sensitive areas that vary and that are actively being developed in Massachusetts and other places. So that provides a sort of another driver. As far as what homeowners can do, of course, septic maintenance and EPA has a whole sort of other, we have other programs related to just like basic, it's important to maintain your septic systems, whether you have an advanced one or not. So pumping and caring for them and what you put in them. And, all of these things are things that we can do. Even diet and drugs that we're putting down the drain affect the the output from our septic system. So there's sort of lots of ways to answer or to go after that question. Hope I provided some directions.
Do these systems usually have emergency detectors for any leaks and or spills or buildups in the systems themselves?
Some have things like float valves and alarms. And I would have to refer you to other partners as far as like what we have going on in our particular systems with that question.
And then the next question is in reference to wildlife and fisheries in the wetlands. How will those be sustained or not impaired in addition to improving water quality?
So we are working with NRCS on the rerouting and the town on rerouting the fishing run. So that's to enhance fish passage. And there is wildlife that is currently using the site even under its current agricultural uses. So we seek to enhance the opportunities and the diversity and the complexity of microenvironments for those species, and also to actively plant things like Atlantic white cedars and other species of those of cultural significance that I mentioned before, potentially sweetgrass and other species that's very much in the planning stage at this moment. But directionally, we're seeking to enhance those opportunities for habitat and wildlife.
Do you know if the wood alternative system would require more or less maintenance than current advanced treatment units?
So that will vary a lot by what we're talking about in the advanced treatment technology space. There are many different types of units that work different ways with and without carbon. So it's very hard to generalize. We expect the carbon to be long lasting. We expect that, it can be decades before you might need to consider replacing those wood chips, but in general, they're very stable and slow to degrade and provide a long-lasting source. The enhanced treatment unit that I talked about that we're using that goes after the septic tank before the leach field, it's gravity fed, so it's all going downhill. It's not going. So that's advantageous in a power outage, but then other systems are pressure dosed and they need power, and that has other advantages and other advantages depending on what kind of lot you have, like I mentioned. So I hesitate. It's not a one size fits all kind of thing. And that's why we're seeking to have more different kinds of solutions available and more amenable to users.
And this question I know has come up before. Do the type of wood chips matter? The size of the chip, hardwood, softwood, tree species, anything like that?
Yeah, I love this question. And it's a little out of my depth. I would refer you to my colleagues that are far deeper in the weeds of the actual wastewater treatment processes. But we have talked about this, especially in terms of other settings, tropical settings or other environments where you want to use a local source. That's going to be key. Like use the lignocellulose that you have on hand. I cannot speak to the nitty gritty of one versus another, but I expect that they're all better than nothing. Probably has something to do with surface area and contact. Getting that water in contact with the material that you're seeking to do the work, perhaps more than the material itself. But again, I would really need to refer you to my wastewater professionals.
And then I have two PFAS related questions. I'm not sure if you can answer them or not, but we'll see.
Let's see.
Does PFAS monitoring come into play when considering distributing wastewater in the environment more widely?
I would need to ask a clarifying question on that. I can say that we are monitoring for PFAS compounds, and we do, we find them in groundwater, and that, we're monitoring them in a specific set of contexts. But I would need a little more clarity on that question about the more widely part.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't
It's
have
okay.
that. Yeah, and then the other one, you mentioned PFAS treatment reductions, but would wetlands then become a sink for PFAS since PFAS does not degrade? Is that something that you guys have talked about?
We don't have, I can't speak to that question. I have plenty of PFAS colleagues that I could refer it to. But yeah, there's a lot of PFAS and there's a lot of ways that there's a lot of precursors and compound that it turns into, or, there's a lot of pathways. It's to say that wetlands are sources or sinks is not something that is not a deep literature dive I have done at this time.
Thank you. I know we're coming up on the end of the hour. I'm not sure if we're going to go over. But I have at least one more question.
Mm-hmm.
Can creation of wetlands be linked to climate resilient natural infrastructure to access funding available in this area while saving two birds with one stone?
Yeah, great question. Was there more to it? Sorry.
No, I hadn't realized it was a funding question. So maybe it's really not in your
funding's not
ballpark.
Necessarily. I'm not going to be able to have a great answer on funding, but I would point you to the Nature Conservancy, who are also partners in this work and who are very much thinking about co-benefits, climate resiliency. Wetlands do, store and sequester carbon over very long time scales. They can be part of the solution. We're also, one particular angle we think about with this restoration is how we can limit the use of fossil fuels during construction, right? You need a lot of heavy machinery to come out and do this. And so are there ways through our construction methods? Can we, in another setting that we're working on, that our partners at the State Division of Ecological Restoration in Massachusetts are working on is, having farmers restore their own lands. And maybe there are some simpler ways to do that work. It doesn't have to be complicated, but it can be a lot of heavy lifting.
Maybe we have time for one more.
Mm-hmm.
Are you aware of any studies that show the amount of natural denitrification happening in the soil around conventional septic systems?
Yes, so there is abundant literature. I would point you to William Robertson, Brian Howes. I'm sure there's many others that have looked at denitrification within the aquifer system. I believe you're referring to unsaturated and saturated zones of an aquifer system. And your mileage will vary depending on how much co-deposited carbon there is naturally in those systems and the chemistry, the chemical conditions in any given context. So I tend to, say that we can't, groundwater systems are incredibly complicated to study. They're a black box. They're hard to sample and measure and know enough things about, especially as they change over time in response to what we're putting into them. So I tend to think that we should know what's coming out of the effluent and within the treatment system that we can control and not rely on the aquifer to perform additional treatment, since it is kind of a wild card.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Laura. I think this has been very informative, and I know there's been a lot of interest. I'm sorry that we were not able to get to all of the questions in the chat. I
am here for follow-up, and I welcome your questions.
And
thank
I
you
know
all
that
so much.
The recording will be posted, I think someone said within 2 weeks, but usually it's a lot faster than that. So thanks, everybody.